our next speaker comes with a proven track record of prototyping and launching innovative and user-centered products that deepen belonging. Now, as a principal product manager in global payments at Airbnb, she owns and leads outcomes related to the Big Data Foundation, ML/AI-based financial forecasting, and product-led growth features that directly impact users and drive conversion. This will be a really interesting talk, so get ready, because here comes Dr. Theresa Johnson.
Thank you. Cool. Can everybody hear me? Great. Thanks for the dance break. That was super fun. I'm so glad to see so many of you after lunch. Let's get started. Let's jump right in. This is just the intro slide. There's some logos there, yada, yada, yada. But how did I end up here? Who am I? So how did I end up at Airbnb also, from a Dr. Theresa Johnson? Well, I was a host on Airbnb. I have been a host on Airbnb since 2015, actually. And then I became an accidental data scientist. So I actually have a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics. And I get asked all the time, how did that happen? How did you end up at Airbnb? Well, after that PhD, where I used machine learning to detect plasma anomalies on satellites, I decided to go into data science. Then after that, I became an accidental product manager. So I was a data scientist for a couple years when someone said, I think you should be a product manager. And you know, the path between those things was not super linear, so happy to talk about that if you have any questions. But we're here to talk about a little bit about forecasting. So as you know, I ran the forecasting team at Airbnb, so our financial forecast all the way up until we went IPO. So how do we know that the data we're giving to the street is accurate? How do we make sure we don't have to restate our financials? And the point is, a good forecaster is not smarter than everyone else. She merely has her ignorance better organized. So today we're going to talk about uncertainty, but not deep uncertainty in the technical domain, because I think you all probably know about that. We're going to talk about how that relates to the product process. So you get a little product talk sprinkled in here because I was a data scientist and now I'm a product manager. So this is in general how uncertainty looks to us, right? It's all over the map. There might be uncertainty. That dot is your ability to hire. You don't know if you can actually hire the right people. The other dot might be regulations that impact your product. That might be your fickle users. They say they want one thing, they don't actually adopt it. And technology. The technology landscape is constantly shifting. And global events. We all know a big one that we are somewhat kind of sort of out of, but there's global events that impact Airbnb all the time, whether it's a hurricane or a flood or a fire or any sort of thing that's happening across the globe. The point of a forecast is to organize that information, organize that into certain buckets so that you can accurately, or at least try to accurately predict what's coming. There's a few different types of uncertainty in any process that you might uncover. There's buckets of uncertainty in your knowledge. Do you actually know what's going on? Under the hood, that's kind of like model uncertainty or parameter uncertainty. These are the types of things that we use in our financial forecast. There might be natural variability. Just in general, there's a distribution, usually a normal distribution around your users, but it might be centered one direction or the other. So that's just temporal variability, like those spikes in events that happen, or spatial variability, things that happen differently across the globe. And then you get down to the business uncertainty, decision uncertainty. What do you do about it? Maybe you know that, hey, our model is going to be wrong in certain ways. Maybe you know that, hey, certain things are going to happen across the globe. Then there's decision uncertainty. What do you actually do about it? This is how we're going to categorize the uncertainty in the product process, which is an inherently uncertain process. So all the way from strategy, who is my customer or user, and what are her use cases? That's knowledge uncertainty. That's natural variability in your user base, and it's decision uncertainty. How do you actually make decisions around your user population and who you want to go after? There's design uncertainty. That's also knowledge, natural, and decision uncertainty. What does the user want? So maybe you don't know, maybe you don't have a way to measure it. There's variability in what individual users want, and then how do you actually make a decision? How do I organize a team? Usually that's pretty much decision uncertainty. You get a lot of information from interviews, but you still have to decide what are our values and what's going to drive how we build this team that's going to actually impact the product. How do I measure success? That's usually knowledge uncertainty. So is the measurement accurate? Do I have the right instrument? Do I have the right logging to actually tell what's happening in that process? And after I ship, what challenges can I expect at and after launch? Well, you don't know. It's natural variation, right? You don't know what's going to happen in the globe. You don't know what's going to happen naturally. So at least in this product process, we've sort of characterized the types of uncertainty you could face. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about, first, crawling. Incremental improvements limit uncertainty. This might be how some companies or you and your teams first approach uncertainty. But then walk. Incremental begs for disruption. What do you do when you need to be disruptive and you've gotten out of the mode of just being able to make incremental improvements? And then run. And I'll try to convince you that platforms plus theory combine to scalably manage uncertainty in your product process. So part one, crawl, incremental improvements. And for this, I'm going to use several Airbnb examples. So I'm going to take an example of something that I worked on pretty early in my career, the list your space flow. So I was a host. So there's this process by which hosts come to our website and they try to put their place on Airbnb for rent. So what we found when there was a big redesign of the flow, and there were certain things that we found that were shocking to us. One, what we were trying to do was roll out Instant Book. Instant Book is the process where a host just kind of automatically accepts the guest that they want to stay on their platform. So new List Your Space with these preset booking settings showed a 20% increase. We were successful at driving Instant Book adoption. But overall listing creation stalled. There were some drag metrics. Who's heard of drag metrics? So drag metrics are the counterfactuals that you also need to pay attention to. So as you're running your experiment and figuring out what you're doing well, you also need to pay attention to the counterfactual, what's dropping as a result. So overall listings created were dropping by 17% in listings started, and 5.5% drop in listings finished. Drag metrics. What do we do? Well, incremental improvements can come to the rescue. So we did some logging analysis, we looked into the data, and we found that describing your place was a hard step. People fear the blank page. So even back then, we could say, let's use AI. Let's use AI to generate some things about your place that seem to go along with your type of hosting and see if we can help you recreate a description. We also found that we were trying to get more fidelity on the location where they were staying. And this is a pretty complicated page. This was overwhelming users, and they were overwhelmingly not completing this step. So let's just move it later. It's called escalating commitment, when you move certain things that are harder to later in the process after they've already ramped up and they're already committed to that flow. So we did both of those two things. That's like crawling. Right? It's actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. If any of you have kids, who's ever seen them learn how to crawl? It's not that big of a deal. Everybody's super excited about it. Oh my God, first crawl. But it's pretty soft landing. They're not going to fall down. And so this is where Airbnb was. At first, we were very early in the process, moving fast. But then edge cases blew up, and then finally we got to, focus on user experiences. That's where you sort of start to think about incremental improvements at that step 5. But then the question remains, how do you walk? What do you do if you get disrupted? What do you do if you're about to get disrupted? So at that stage, every other booking platform started to bring on short-term rentals. Right? What do you do to make your process better? What do you do to better serve hosts and make them come to your platform? How do you get from 1.5x, which you saw on that graph, to the 4x you saw at the end? What gets you there? Well, walking. So the point about walking, relative to crawling, again, if any of you have kids, which I have 2, it's much harder, actually. They're prone to fall down a lot more. They're prone to fall flat on their face. Even, you can't hold out that thing forever, even though it provides some sort of guideposts. So how do you actually get from that 1.5 to 4x? You fall down a lot. But one of these kids is falling down more than the other. So let's go into some examples of walking. I'm going to give you 2 examples. The co-hosting marketplace, which we launched to help every host provide signature hospitality. And this is historical. We launched it back in the day. Professional photography to showcase your space in the best light. And there'll be a quiz at the end to see which one of these methodologies worked. So first, the co-hosting marketplace. So these are dated slides on purpose, vintage slides. But we started that premise with, we believe that co-hosting helps owners offer the signature hospitality that is Airbnb. So allowing them to give care, time, and skills into hosting a place if they don't know what they're doing, if they don't have the time to host themselves, but they have a place to host. Seems reasonable, right? It seems like a reasonable premise. But this is, again, the 0 to 1. Starting, from January to May, we weren't hitting our metrics. We weren't hitting our incremental nights growth. So what do? If you want to be disruptive, you double down. So this is our projected impact if we did nothing. But of course, we're not going to do nothing. We're going to go global with the co-hosting marketplace. So we're going to roll it out to everywhere. We're going to double down on this inbound marketplace, so creating this matching capability between new hosts and existing hosts, and we're going to make sure that they find each other, and everybody's going to be happy. Even though it was only about a 10% match rate, we are going to double down on that inbound matching, and we're going to change the flow so that everybody can find a co-host to help them list their space. We're going to do branded landing pages for optimization. Get a better than 25% click-through rate. So, okay, we added some additional impact. At least that's what our projections said. We were going to add additional impact by doing all those global rollout and extra touch points. And then, of course, we're going to integrate into the core product, right? We're going to integrate right into List Your Space that we just talked about. So we're going to take over some of those pages. And we're going to have additional marketing to a frequent traveler landing page, and we're going to do new user acquisition tactics. And that'll push us back to where we can hit our goals, right? That's the end of the co-hosting experience. So sit with that for a moment. Think about our projected plans, and think about what you might predict the outcome would be. Next, I'm going to talk about professional photography. Another service for hosts where we realized that people really needed help with this step. So, Thomas Friedman of the New York Times in 2014 said that was Airbnb's real innovation, a platform of trust, where everyone can not only see everyone else's identity, but also rate them as good, bad, or indifferent hosting guests. That was the real innovation. At the time, you couldn't really rate hotels. This was the only place that gave you that visibility. That was his quote. And Airbnb thought it's these photos that are creating the trust, right? The ability to see good listings was creating the trust. So by 2016, most hosts around the world were eligible for a free professional photo shoot of their listing. So it would turn something like this with professional photography into this. Yeah, which one would you rather stay at? And as a company, we felt like trust was driving growth, not the other way around, and so we had to double down on trust. And there's a small army of photographers that they developed in 2011, and all the way to 2016, they kept growing this army of photographers to take these amazing pictures of listings. But most users reported that getting high-quality photos was very difficult, right? Either by taking them themselves or actually being able to book a photographer. So what to do about it? Well, why was that? Because providing this service was a large business operation. We had 10 employees in SF, 2,000 photographers shooting in 100 countries, 1,000 markets, 150 to 200K requests fulfilled, and we were spending $13 to $15 million a year. At the time, that was a lot of money to be spending on this operation. So what did we do? We conducted an A/B test to see if this is actually driving what we think it should be driving, which is more bookings, better outcomes all across the platform. So what we did was we instrumented a variable. If people are familiar with that, who's familiar with instrumental variables? No data scientists? A couple people? Yeah, so we instrumented a variable on people who requested pro photography. You want to make sure they actually requested it. And some we told they were eligible for it, and their eligibility was there. And some we said, sorry, there's no photographers available at the moment. And we looked at the differences between what happened in that treatment and control. What happened was it didn't drive overall bookings, but it did drive certain metrics for those individual users. Interesting. So what we did instead was we made it available globally by allowing you to pay. So now it's a paid product. You only pay once you get a booking, especially if you're new. It's affordable, based on the average earnings per market. It allows us to scale. It gets rid of that delay and people not being able to see it available. And it saves us money, allowing us to drive, other tech-driven methods of ensuring trust and safety. So, which product learned to walk at the end? Interactive, hands. Which one do you think learned to walk, i.e. succeeded? You think the second one. You think pro photography learned to walk. Anybody else? Think co-hosting learned to walk? What do you think back there? Photography? Co-hosting? You think co-hosting learned to walk? So let's see. Both, actually, but after years of falling on their faces. Most kids eventually learn to walk, as you maybe know if you have kids. But it was after years of falling on their faces because it wasn't built on a stable foundation and it wasn't built with a theory in mind. So let's talk about how you run. In order to run fast after you get to scale, you need two things that I think, an uncertainty platform and a theory. This is what it takes to run. Sturdy footing and confidence about what's coming. How fast are you going to run if you don't think you know what's around the corner and whether you're going to smash into a wall? How fast can you possibly run if you don't have stable and sturdy footing to run on top of? Not very fast, right? You're going to be kind of tentative. So you need both of these things in order to run fast and to actually, run at scale. So I'm a platform PM. I like platforms because platforms let you run. We build in guardrails, we build in safety nets, and we give you sandboxes to play in, right? We give sandboxes to experiment with things. We give guardrails for trust and safety. We make sure the risk protocols are in place. We make sure there's APIs that you can't overload, right? That's the job of a platform. But what about the future? What about that, running fast and not knowing what's around the corner? So we've had a lot of talks about machine learning. I use machine learning in my forecasting world, but there are limitations. It's very good at interpolation. Purely optimizing the error function with an arbitrary degree of freedom will always perfectly fit, right? You can always model the past. But it struggles with extrapolation. Right? It struggles with being good at the future. That's why some of these, LLMs are coming into play. But what I as a physicist do, we extrapolate from the lab to the universe. We extrapolate using theory. It requires insight into how the world works. It explains a phenomenon based on its constituent parts. And our uncertainty framework is going to be as good as our theory. So we have to develop some theory, some theoretical model for how the world that we're playing in works so that we can have some basis to say, there's going to be a wall right over there, and there's going to be, something weird that happens with the Olympics, and we kind of think that this is what's going to happen in New York, right? We have to have some theory of how the world plays out. This is also how we build our forecasting tool, but again, I'm applying it also to the product process. So the theory plus platform for reducing uncertainty. I'm going to talk to you about it for growth products, for infrastructure products, as well as for machine learning products, because they're a little bit different. The different types of platform you need and the different types of theory you might need for each of these product processes. So first, for growth. For growth products that are really just about driving users' engagement, driving new users, it's really about curiosity and optimism. How do you bring new people to your site? Well, our platform for that has a lot to do with our experimentation platform. So this is kind of a fuzzed out screenshot of our experimentation platform at Airbnb. It's called our ERF, our Experiment Reporting Framework. It was built in-house. So we can launch endless number of experiments and put in the metrics that you care about, and this allows a lot of the growth hacking that takes place, right? This is the platform that allows that to scale, one of the platforms that allow that to scale. So as an example, also in the theory department, you have to have a theory around what are you going to experiment on. Maybe you want to experiment on this widget. Maybe you want to experiment on what price you show there and how you show it. So the theory of uncertainty in growth products goes something like this. In the strategy realm, focus on those high-touch surfaces. Focus on those places where everybody has to land. But don't think about large changes, thinking about smaller changes, so that you can actually make sure that you're measuring what's causal. Because if you redesign the entire page all at once, how do you know which portion of that is causal? Design, details matter and build empathy with the user, but be very concise about for which user and for when in their life cycle. For the team, cross-functional is key, but each new team member brings additional communication points. So make sure that you have a communication model that scales across different types of team members in different time zones, working remotely now. So think about that when you're thinking about, we used to think about single pizza teams. Well, nobody's eating pizza together anymore. So what does it mean to have a small enough team to be nimble? In measurement, you want to A/B test your way to success, but beware of measurement error and p-value hacking, right? Don't just look to see, okay, it's converged, and so now I'm going to stop it, right? Make sure you're modeling that up front. And then when you ship early, refine often, but don't be afraid to rip it out and re-architect. That's exactly what we had to do with both co-hosting and paid photography. And by the time I moved to payments, I helped rip all of it out and re-architect it in a platform way. And that's often what happens with growth things that you're building incrementally and driving fast. Internal tooling. I've also built internal tooling. So, we want to be a united community to create, belonging internally. How does internal tooling do that? Well, one of the ways that we do that is a metrics platform that helps drive our internal tools. If you were here yesterday, you probably heard my colleague talk about the Minerva framework. So as a product manager, I built things on top of the Minerva framework. It's a great platform. I, was able to look at things like how much people are using different metrics or different tools that I'm building on top of it. So this is also another platform that we use to be able to drive that measurement. I had to be able to look at things like reaching leadership, like how much did different parts of the business actually engage with it. And the theory of uncertainty in internal products is a little bit different, but has some similarities. In the strategy, ensure every voice is heard, but beware of listening to only the loudest user. Beware of listening to only Brian Chesky, because his directs and their directs matter too. So beware of just tailoring your solution to one customer or tailoring your solution to one user, which is a big risk in internal products. It's the team or the customer that shouts the loudest. Identify and protect critical components, but remain the expert. Remain the expert in that domain so that others aren't parachuting in and telling you what to build. In the team, partner with a strong technical team, but don't lose touch. Don't lose track of the user voice. That's one of the risks with internal tools, is that you're kind of just driving and building, and you're building features for yourselves and forgetting that, hey, I'm building also for CS agents that work in Dublin, and also for CS agents that work in Portland and Singapore and Gurgaon. When you measure, make a plan to measure and manage while acknowledging that most data is limited. You know, at most, like even if you have 100,000 internal users, that's still pretty limited relative to possibly the millions that are coming to your site externally. So be sure to acknowledge those limitations. And when you ship, just know that, especially as a product or engineer, you have to handhold your user. Make sure the entire team handholds the users through it as well, because you also learn and iterate using that process. We're coming to the end, so don't forget to upload your questions. Now we're going to talk about machine learning products and the theory and platform for machine learning products. So you might know this, machine learning is utilized at every step of the user experience. This is just a partial mapping from search ranking, account takeover prediction, smart pricing, urgency and consideration messages, ticket routing, identifying bad actors, LTV, issue prediction. That's just a subset. Now we have chatbots, smart solutions that surface different things on your profile depending on who you are and where you are. Part of this is powered by an internal ML AI system, of course, a platform that allows for that. A centralized platform that combines data sources to infer attribute states and intelligently gathers feedback, because you usually need user feedback for those actions. So here's what a sketch used to look like when we were trying to launch categorization of what would it mean to try to launch categories and then have the user provide feedback on whether this is truly a boutique hotel or whether this is truly a ryokan, or whether this is truly an actual bed and breakfast, or whatever else it might be called across the globe. So this was from in a launch in 2018 when Brian Chesky first announced that we're going to go into categories. It was a huge shift in the company, and it was a huge shift in the way we modeled our data, and is heavily machine learning driven, based on all of those platform components. So the theory of uncertainty in machine learning products, a little bit different again. Define a clear use case and applicable technology, but anticipate the technology will shift, right? When we first built this AI/ML platform, large language models, a bunch of us had took Fei-Fei Li's class at Stanford, we knew that there were hidden Markov models and part of the LLMs, but nobody was really applying it in real life. So realize that the technology will shift and be ready to adapt. Let your users help you improve the product, but you also need to plan for the amount of user feedback and manual labeling that you'll need. I think we say we're going to launch these big ML AI models, but we forget how much human in the loop there is to make sure that there's actual training data and feedback. And the team bring humanists and technologies together, but again, make sure they talk. Make sure they're communicating with each other. Make sure the humanist who's saying hey, this is how it should look and feel as a human, I don't just want a black box. As an engineer, it's all black box. I want to give you the black box. So make sure that they're talking. The most quantitative solutions often require qualitative measurements. How does the user feel about this? How does the user feel talking to a chatbot? How does the user feel about personalized recommendations on a payment screen? Those are inherently qualitative and inherently uncertain. So just make sure you know about that uncertainty in that model. And when you ship, double down on trust. Ensure that there's a place for all customers in this new world, right? Because not every customer will feel bought in. Not every customer, in the categorization example, what happens if they don't have a cool category? What if they're not hosting an igloo? Do people feel left out? How does your host community feel about that if they're not hosting a castle, right? And you're featuring castles on your homepage. So ensure that there's a place for everyone in the new world. And I'll leave you with this quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I thought is a pretty funny and sarcastic quote relative to this talk. So I'll take some questions now if there are any. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for an amazing talk. While people are still sending questions, because there are just two, may I take a selfie with you? We have a full house, and I really loved your talk because I'm non-techie and I understood everything, so that's worth a lot.
Awesome.
Do you guys mind? Yes. You can make silly faces. faces. Wait.
Oh, turn it. There you
Yes.
go.
Yay. Excellent. Thank you. Did somebody photobomb? I hope you did. Alrighty. We have 2 questions as of now. How about it?
Great. So I'll take the one that has the most votes. Talking about uncertainty, how is Airbnb facing the problems in the New York City housing market? We're respecting the regulations, as we always do. Because I'm not as familiar, I don't work in the policy department, I'm not going to state what the regulations are, but I can state, I'm a host in San Francisco. And so I know when the regulations came out in San Francisco, there was a 90-day cap on hosting without you being in the house, and otherwise you can only host a bedroom beyond that in your actual home. So we're pretty used to regulations, even in our home city, right? And so we are dealing with it in the way that we always do, which is to respect city regulations, continue to lobby, to continue to help hosts find their own voice, and continue to champion them. That bit of uncertainty happens honestly across the globe. We have a huge policy team that flies all over the world to many jurisdictions and has a bead on when these things are happening. So we're able to know kind of when this regulation is kind of coming down the pike, and to some extent be able to plan for it by ramping up in other areas or engaging the host community to advocate for themselves.
That's nice, thank you. How did you get to be a data scientist?
Let's see. So after I finished my PhD at Stanford, I was deciding between going into academia or going into industry. I had already helped sell a company to Google before I went to my PhD, and I sort of just looked inward and did some self-reflection and decided that I wanted to be in the startup world. And then from there, what role could I play? I probably wasn't going to be a software engineer, even though I had some coding skills. They were mostly in C and C++. So that wasn't really Ruby on Rails. That wasn't really relevant. But I had a lot of data skills, and I'd done a ton of machine learning and signal processing in my PhD. So that's how I ended up going into data science. Let's see. What else is getting voted up? What would be your #1 tip when dealing with uncertainty? So if there's anything that I want you to take away from this talk as the #1 tip for dealing with uncertainty, it is to organize your uncertainty. Put it into buckets. Know what types of uncertainty your business is facing. Know what types of technical uncertainty, what types of market uncertainty, what types of team uncertainty you're facing. And that is the best way to be able to truly kind of forecast where is it going to impact your team. You can even give things like weighting factors to it, right? So technological uncertainty, it's about a 60% chance of happening, but it's not really going to affect us, so I give it a 3 out of 10. Team uncertainty, I don't know if we're going to be able to hire. That would affect us, hugely. And also, I'm really uncertain about it. So, and then you can sort of look at your entire business and say, how much risk or uncertainty are we facing today? And redo that process, potentially quarterly, potentially monthly, depending on the stage of your business.
We have a lot of questions popping up.
Yeah,
Let's go
good
over
job.
the next voted one. How do you quantify in your forecast the impact of the new product features that are still in development prior to deploying in market?
Yeah, so before we want to put anything on the roadmap, we want to have estimated impact. We want to have estimated what population of users will this launch to. So if anyone's heard of the RICE framework, it's kind of like reach, impact, cost, and expected value, right? And so you want to kind of model what is the reach of this product, how many users will it touch? Well, it's going to touch all of our users under the age of 35 who are in these types of markets, for example. So you want to estimate the reach, you want to estimate the impact. So what is it going to drive? Is it going to drive additional nights booked? Or is it going to drive additional nights available? Is it going to drive additional engagement? So what is that impact? What's the cost associated with that? How many engineering hours? How many people hours will it take to build? And then what's the overall effect? Right, the multiplier. And so that's how we estimate. So in order to decide to put anything on the roadmap, to decide to put all of our energy into, I'm not saying we use exactly RICE, but that's the type of model that we have to use to say, we're going to put a designer on this, we're going to put data science on this, and we're going to put product, and we're going to put a whole eng team. So before we do that, we've estimated the impact. Now, how do you deploy it into your forecast? Usually you wait until it's in ERF. You wait till it's in the experiment reporting framework to actually include that, because you actually have to measure, is it having the expected outcome? So usually we wait until it's in an experiment before we try to include it in the forecast.
Thank you very much. Wow, people woke up. 10 more questions, but we will take only the upvoted ones because we will be soon out of time. Is there some alternative tool
I'll talk fast.
Say it again?
I said I'll talk fast.
Yeah, okay. Is there some alternative tool? No, just kidding. Alternative tool to Minerva on the market?
I wish I knew names for you. I've heard of them. I've heard of a number of big data shops that claim that they can aggregate and clean your metrics. They can do ELT for you. They can clean metrics for you. They can make sure you have a core data repository. I've heard of a lot of them. There's also a lot of startups. I don't know that I can promote any of them in particular, but if we chat after or if you email me, I could probably shoot you some that I've heard of, that I've heard my startup teams having a good time with.
Thank you very much. Are you doing anything differently at Airbnb since COVID?
Maybe some of you have heard of our live and work anywhere policy. It's called LAWA. So we have a policy where anyone who works for the company can live and work anywhere, usually in your original country of residence, but you can also travel the globe and work remotely in any country in the world for up to most countries in the world for up to 90 days. And Airbnb will help you get a temporary work visa to be able to facilitate that. And to supplement that, in terms of getting together, just last week, I was in the San Francisco office where we have what's called a gathering week, which we have at least twice a year, usually, just to bring teams together and give them the opportunity to work live. And so we flew in our colleagues from Bangalore, we flew in our colleagues from Montreal, we flew in our colleagues from North Carolina in the United States, so we fly in the team from wherever they are. I've also flown to Bangalore for a gathering week. So we do make sure to get together and make sure we keep that communication. The other thing we do is most people are camera on people at Airbnb because we like to see each other's faces. So those are just a couple things.
Culture comes ahead of a budget, huh?
Budget matters. Budget matters, but this is important.
Yeah,
so.
Wow. No, really impressive. Thank you. Tell us about uncertainty. Oh, sorry.
Uh-oh.
Tell us
Moving
about
around.
uncertainty about people. You mentioned communication potential problems, but how do you treat it?
Yeah, so part of that is harder to treat in a remote environment. It's harder to treat in a remote environment when people aren't seeing each other, so we try to have cross-collaborative teams, so not just our product team, not just Eng team, but product, Eng, design, and data science all get together at the same location at the same time whenever possible. We also have something called core value workshops. The core values are run pretty deep at Airbnb. They're part of our interview process. And we also have core value workshops that a team can partake in. And so that really can help just open up the conversation, get people to be more transparent. And a lot of times, just that transparency and vulnerability helps folks communicate better.
All right, thank you so much. We will take 2 last questions. And the most upvoted one is, what advice do you have for another data scientist becoming a PM to be outstanding in product?
Let's see. So the biggest thing, I'll just be vulnerable about what I had to learn. I had to learn to stop being the smartest person in the room. That's what you're taught to do as a data scientist. That's what you're taught to do as a PhD, is your job is to be in the room and have the answer. You stop having the answer as a product manager. That's no longer your job. Your job is to facilitate the answer. Yes, you have a POV. Yes, you have a point of view. But your job is not to have the answer anymore. And so you'll be a great product manager, someone who your engineers want to come with for questions, want to come with come to for requirements, one's designers want to work with, if you can extract yourself from the mindset that I need to be the one to have the answer. So I think that was my biggest lesson learned, and I had a really great mentor to kind of help coach me through that process, who used to be an engineer himself before he went into product.
All right, thank you. Let's go for the last one. Thoughts on tackling design and architectural complexity that would arise with generative AI and the paradigm shift it presents in human-computer interaction?
Yeah, so it needs to be an organizational shift. I think that's part of the challenge, is that if your organization is not ready to shift and reform around that AI, so you need to have platforms built probably all across your product. So that's the architecture. I don't actually think it's architectural complexity that would rise. It's more like human and organizational complexity. Because building platforms across the organization, you can kind of have the same architecture. For most parts of where you're building. And our machine learning in payments is pretty much the same machine learning that's in trust, which is pretty much the same machine learning that surfaces things to the host and guests, right? We use a lot of the same features. So some of it is about combining those features. That's not necessarily complexity, it's simplicity. So getting simple is harder. And the paradigm shift in human-computer interaction is making sure that every product team really grapples with, how am I going to get the user involved? How am I going to pull in that user feedback? How am I going to, whether it's a CS agent and you're summarizing the case for them, whether it's a user and you're running a chat bot, or it's categorization and you need them to give a review, so if you know that this is an igloo or a boutique hotel. So you have to be really thoughtful in the human-computer interaction of how you're going to nudge them to give you that feedback.
All right, and unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, guys, for your questions. Thank you, Theresa, so much.